Now what about those mountains? Have you ever climbed a mountain? How many of you have climbed a mountain? A few of you, several of you actually. Or even a very steep hill, which as you stood at the bottom and looked up and how it rose above you seemed like a mountain. Mountains or steep hills? Okay.
What about mountains of life?
Mountains of life, we've probably all climbed a few of those too. It can be daunting. The mountains, the steep hills, the mountains of life can be daunting, and yet there's something in us that wants to take it on, even as we fight that strong temptation to turn around and take a different path. Last week, we were talking about being new creations, but we didn't talk about the mountains that often are standing in the way, blocking our creative thoughts and energies. Paul was well aware of the mountains standing in the way of the Corinthian church as this new worshiping community struggled to find its way to become a new creation, to become a growing, strong community of faith. He knew the challenges they faced within the community itself, and the challenges and external pressures exerted from the larger community around them, the societal pressures. Yet Paul talked about unbelievable hope. Paul talked about living boldly, living in freedom, living in a process of constant and ongoing transformation, kindling that divine spark of life shining deep in our souls so that it glows more and more brightly, drawing others to the beacon of hope. Even as their energies were focused on learning to be church, the Corinthians were being drawn out, the Corinthian church was being drawn out into the world to offer new life to others, to those around them. Paul had experienced this new life emerging in his heart. He knew how the living Christ changes you to the core of your being, how the living Christ calls you and empowers you to new ways of knowing and doing and being, how the living Christ calls you and empowers you to draw others into a new way of living. Paul knew that even as he himself was being transformed, he had to offer to others what he was discovering for himself. The new creation in his heart was giving him power to bring new life to others. Last week, when I talked about when we are in Christ, there is a new creation, how individuals become new creations, how congregations can become new creations, how our sacred work becomes creating spaces at Fort Street, in Detroit, in our world, for new creation to come into being. I challenged you with the question, got what it takes to be a new creation? Because you see, life in Christ is always about new creation. But this new creation requires something of us. Life in Christ is always about newness of life, deep in the heart of an individual, deep in the heart of a church, deep in the heart of a community. But we have to allow the change to happen and live into the newness of life that will set us free. And living into new creation, into newness of life, is always about living in the power of the Spirit, that ever-present Pentecostal Spirit, always looking for spaces to move wildly in our lives, urging us here at Fort Street to be the hands and feet and the heart of Jesus in the middle of Detroit. I said too last week, new creation doesn't just happen with the wish of a magic wand. It takes work. Work within our own individual lives, work within our own community of faith, and sometimes that work can seem like a mountain, a towering, daunting mountain looming large before us. And then there are the societal realities around us, seeming so ominous and imposing we feel powerless and want to look for something else to take on rather than face the mountains. And yet the mountain stands there firmly, right before us, waiting while we try to ignore it. Now, if we're truly honest and really look carefully, we might even see one mountain after another, after another, after another, each higher than the last, each requiring more of us than the one before, each blocking the way to newness of life. But when we're living in the Spirit, something deep within us rises up, wanting to take on those mountains, scary and daunting as they can be. This week, I was thinking about the lyrics to a pop song, The Climb. There's always going to be another mountain. I'm always going to want to make it move. There's always going to be another mountain. I'm always going to want to make it move. And I thought about Jesus' mini parable about being able to move mountains with faith like a tiny mustard seed. The problem with Jesus' parables, though, is that once we take them out of the context in which they were originally told, it's so easy to lose the intended meaning. Most of us have been taught to think that if we just have a tiny little bit of faith, tiny as an almost invisible mustard seed, we're supposed to be able to do anything. Except that's not what Jesus was talking about. It's not what he was saying. Not in that farm culture where he was teaching and preaching. Jesus' reference to the tiny mustard seed was not at all about smallness, not really. It actually was about wildness and expansiveness and faith that spreads quickly all around us, everywhere you can see. Mustard seed is pervasive. It's a pervasive and powerful force in that tiny little seed, tiny as it is to be sure, but once it starts spreading, it's almost impossible to stop it. It spreads fast like a fast-growing weed everywhere, taking over everything. This is the wild, bold, rapidly spreading kind of faith it takes to move those mountains standing in the way of life. It's the kind of faith 4th Street needs to move out into Detroit, making a difference in people's lives, making a difference in the city. But leaning into life faithfully with bold faith isn't just about taking on mountains with a belief that you can conquer them climbing to the top. Leaning into life faithfully is having the courage to climb mountains, to take on that climb, to make it all the way to the top, and also the wisdom to know that what happens along the way is even more important than reaching the summit. Because you see, the journey of the climb is what shapes us and forms us more profoundly than actually reaching the goal. Going back to the lyrics of The Climb, there's always going to be another mountain. I'm always going to want to make it move. Ain't about how fast I get there. Ain't about what's waiting on the other side. It's the climb. I may not know it, but these are the moments I'm going to remember most. Just got to keep going, and I got to be strong. Just keep pushing on. Ain't about how fast I get there. Ain't about what's waiting on the other side. It's the climb. Soon after I graduated from college, I moved to inner city Pittsburgh to live, to teach, to coach, to work storefront ministry with young people. A lot of young people who had very low self-esteem, who did not have very much going for them, and who often had very little support. And in the summer, when I wasn't teaching and coaching in the school, we geared up big time for our storefront ministry and what was happening across the city and these storefront things we had going with the kids. We had all kinds of sports. We had mini dirt bike clubs. We had cultural events, and we had camps. And our senior highs, we would take to Colorado, to the Colorado mountains for ranch camp. Some of these were kids that had never seen a horse, let alone been on one. They'd never, some of them even been out of the city, and certainly not out of Pennsylvania. We took them to ranch camp up in the mountains of Colorado with other inner city kids from New York City, Los Angeles, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, inner city kids from all around the country. We took a couple of days after we got there to acclimate to the altitude, and then the activities came up in big full-time force. Swimming, horseback riding, breakfast trail rides, basketball tournaments, girls teams, boys teams, city playing city. One of our kids from Pittsburgh's name was Ozzy. She was about 16 years old, and she had a 2-year-old daughter. And she was with us, and during that tournament, that basketball tournament with all the girls against all the other cities, we played hard, and she played hard, and she fell and she skinned her knee, but she got up and she kept on playing. And then several days into this trip, it was time for the big mountain climb. It wasn't a dangerous climb. We'd already done that one a few days before. So this wasn't a dangerous climb, but it was a steep, long uphill hike. The philosophy was explained to everyone. We were all going. We were all going together. We were going to help one another. We were all going to get to the top, and everybody was going to make it. We were all going together. And so Ozzy came to me and informed me that she was not going. Her skinned knee hurt. I said, no, you're going. Everyone's going. And she said, no, I'm not. I said, yes, you are. She said, I said, And she said, I'm not going. You can't make me. I said, oh, yeah, I'm making you go up the mountain. Everybody's going. You're going. So Ozzy started along with the rest of us, and me by her side, and we started off with about 150 other kids and lots of adults. I ended up drifting to the back. They asked me to be in the back sweeping, making sure the stragglers kept up with the rest of the group as best we could. And the word came back that one of my kids was hurt. So I went racing up till I found where she was. It was indeed Ozzy. And she had not been paying much attention, and she was pouting and actually walking with her eyes closed part of the time, and she had hurt her ankle. Not badly. I checked it out. I looked to see how she was doing, and there were some great big guys there willing to help her, and they offered to do that. And we had a little bit of an exchange where she said, I can't go now. I said, oh, yes, you can. She said, no, I can't. I said, oh, you're going. She said, no, I'm not, and I won't tell you the rest of the things she said and the various things that she called me. And I said, you're going up the mountain? She said, no. I said, yes. And I looked at Ozzy and I said, you are climbing this mountain, and when you get to the top, I'm going to take your picture so we can take it back home and show your little girl. And then I moved on up ahead. As Ozzy neared the very last stretch, it was steep, it was high, and then there was sort of a little plateau, and then it was a really steep last maybe 50 yards. I went down to join her. The boys at this time were nearly carrying her because you see after the first sprained ankle, she was pouting and wouldn't look where she was going. And she actually sprained her other ankle somewhat. And when she said, now I can't, I said, oh, yes, you can, and you are. So these boys were nearly carrying her, and I went down to join her these last 50 yards. And interestingly enough, Ozzy started to walk. And she walked all the way to the top, and when she got to the summit, I did take her picture. And I took her picture of an Ozzy with a broad, proud, confident smile on her face. And interestingly enough, she didn't really need any help walking all the way down the mountain. It was really good to see Ozzy at the top of the mountain. It was really good to see her achieve something big in her life because she hadn't achieved much to this point. But actually, it was the climb itself that instilled something deep inside of Ozzy that I hope carried her through these many years since that. There's always going to be another mountain. Ain't about how fast I get there. Ain't about what's waiting on the other side. It's the climb. Sometimes other ministers ask me when I'm at conferences and things, what's it like to be a pastor in Detroit? Which, translating it, means in a city making news for being the largest city to file for bankruptcy and for all the many other things that we hear about Detroit on the news. Detroit is poised on the edge of its new future. Fort Street is poised on the edge of its new future. And we are being called to create space, to open our hearts, to allow, even to encourage, maybe even to bring into being new creation, not just in this building, but in the city out there. The mountains are high, and many to be sure, but to be alive means we have to make this climb. To live faithfully means we have to make this climb. And how we make the climb is absolutely essential. What we will learn along the way is more precious than gold. The community we can become if we climb together as members of a faith community and partnered with others in Detroit is amazing beyond our imagination. We know we have to climb these mountains. And we know we have to climb together, cherishing the journey, cherishing the persons we will become, cherishing the community Fort Street will become. This is what is expected of us. This is what we are called to do. So listen. Do you hear it? Do you hear the call? Someone knocking at the door, calling us into this new leg of Fort Street's journey, calling us to climb those mountains. How will we answer the call?